Hi everyone, my name is Gulnur Bekmukhambiatova and I'm here today to talk about what tech can learn from aviation and specifically what happens when the cash is locked up in the wrong place. So imagine your company is growing, customers are paying, and on paper you look successful. But then when you need cash at the top to pay the lenders or keep the company alive, you realize that most of the cash is actually trapped in the product lines, local subsidiaries or JVs and legally cannot be moved. This is exactly what happened to Nordic Aviation Capital or NASDAQ, the world's largest regional aircraft lessor that had to go through the Irish insolvency proceedings and then the Chapter 11 proceedings in the US, even though the operational platform itself had a real value. So what happened to NASDAQ? NASDAQ had record profits for 24 years and was the fifth largest aircraft lessor in the world by the number of aircraft. So NASDAQ sat at the top of a fairly complicated capital structure, including hundreds of aircraft-owning SPVs and debt silos, each of which had its own secured lenders, pledged accounts, and cash sweep waterfalls. So when COVID hit and the lessees stopped or delayed paying, that capital structure suddenly became a liability instead of a strength. And the most important point here is that a lot of the cash that did come in flowed into the silo level accounts where it had to serve interest, principal, and reserves of those specific lenders first. So it could not just be pushed up to NASDAQ to fix group level liquidity without breaching covenants or triggering enforcement. And if you look at this largely from a 30,000 feet perspective, then NASDAQ was a business with assets, aircraft, and customers, but at the level of the holding company, it was effectively starved of oxygen. So this is how you actually end up in the US $6+ billion balance sheet restructuring, even though the underlying business itself was considered worth saving from the perspective of sophisticated creditors. So this is sort of background to all of this. And now if we look at the director's duties, tech founders often ask why didn't the boards of those SPVs just move the cash up to the parent company and save the group? The answer goes directly into the director's duties in the zone of insolvency. So under US and common law principles, once the company approaches insolvency, the directors must consider interests of the creditors as a whole and not just the shareholder at the top. Approaching insolvency in practice means that the company is in the twilight zone. So the things are not business as usual. There is some sort of financial problem, but the company is not at the stage yet where it needs to go in insolvency. So that twilight period is also known as the zone of insolvency or the period of possible insolvency, and can be actually tricky in terms of the director's duties because it can be unclear who the directors should be discharging their duties to. In any case, in the context of the SPV, so the directors must consider interests of secured lenders to that specific SPV. And otherwise, they can be held personally liable for putting the shareholder interest ahead of the creditor's interest. So in other words, the director's duties imposed by operation of law push the directors to keep the cash at the level of individual SPVs, even though that meant that the parent company would end up in the insolvency proceedings in the US under Chapter 11. So I think there are several key lessons in all of this for the tech CEOs and boards. Number one, even if you can have a product market fit but still fail on governance market fit. So if your entity structure, your funding structure, and the director's duties are not designed for stress, then your legal infrastructure can actually contribute to the bankruptcy outcome as demonstrated by the NASDAQ case. Number two, the director's duties shift once the company is in the insolvency zone. The director's duties shift away from growth, founders, and equity upside toward preservation of value. So that means in practice that the directors of SPVs, project companies, and JVs may be obligated to say no to upstream cash requests that would be entirely logical and rational for the group, but could be risky for the company itself. And then number three, the aviation world lives with a complex cross-border capital structure, which can be useful stress test lab for what can go wrong in tech for companies that are adding SPVs, JVs, profit sharing entities, and structured financing. So the lessons, the developments in the aviation world can be used to learn, can be lessons for the tech companies, so that to avoid a situation when the cash is locked up in the wrong company, in the wrong bucket at the worst possible time. Thank you.